Sound check. That's high-tech language for let's get started. All right, good evening, everyone. You could be lots of places on a Monday evening in State College. You could be on Allen Street listening to whatever's going on out there, but you're not. You're here with us, and that's the right choice. So I'm glad you're here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Carpenter. I'm the Michael J. and Aimee Rusinko Kakos Dean in the College of Arts and Architecture at the Pennsylvania State University. And I am just thrilled to have a chance to sit down with Chang Tan, you are Associate Professor of Art History and Asian Studies at the Pennsylvania State University.
Yes.
Wow, that's a pretty good title. Sounds like a good gig.
I'm sure it is. It's wonderful, yeah, especially since the associate has been put in there. That's wonderful.
And so associate has been put there. Now you're off in D.C.
Yes, I am.
What are you doing down there?
I'm on a fellowship at the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts in the National Gallery of Art. So I'm the William C. Setz Fellow there for the year, for which I'm working on my second book project.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. So you can't have a second project unless you had a first project.
It seems to be the sequence of things.
Doesn't it? You want to talk about the first project tonight?
Absolutely.
All right. I happen to have a copy of it here. The Minjian Avant-Garde, Art and the Crowd in Contemporary China.
Art of the crowd, yeah.
Did I say in? I said in, didn't I?
Okay.
All right. Art of the crowd. Of the crowd, not in the crowd. Mm-hmm. That's important though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Art of the crowd, you're saying? Yeah, right. I think they're, to some degree, more important than art of the museum.
So one of the things I was going to start with is asking to define, like I know what the word "the" means, and I think I know what avant-garde means, but Minjian, I'm not sure I'm even pronouncing it well, and you take a bit of time to define that word. And you actually say that there's really not an English translation for this word.
Right.
So that's why you used it as part of the title, because it's so challenging and problematic. So can we start with that word? What does Minjian mean?
Right. So first off, I've been advised not to use a non-English word in the title by some people in the publishing community. Okay, you don't want to buy a book with unknown word. But actually, after the peer reviewers read my manuscript, they all say that I have to put this word in the title because that's such a key concept of the book. Mm-hmm. So Minjian, to translate literally, would be among the people. Okay, and Ming would be either the people or the folk or the grassroots. So it's basically referring to the sort of broad, volatile, and non-elite public. So that is like a sort of a very simple, straightforward translation of Minjian, but it's really depending on the context, right? So in some contexts, it would translate very directly as a folk. Like folk literature, folk art would be Minjian Yishu, Minjian Wenxue, and so on. But many people also use it as like grassroots, like Minjian activism, for example. Okay, and then I would say in certain other contexts, it's like a more neutral translation, which I rendered as a multitude of things, a multitude of people, as in contrast to the singular. And I think in contemporary sort of language of China, Minjian is often seen as something that stands apart from both the elite, Jingying, and the official, Guanfang. So it's something that is not elite and not associated with the government. So, and there are also artists who render it as, and I think the quote I have there was, people and objects who are active in the lower strata of society. So is that like confusing things? Is that there's just like many layers of things, and that's a word that's been used differently throughout the 20th century of China, sometimes denoting positive things, sometimes denoting more problematic, negative things. So that's like I have a whole section talking about the historical context of this word in the book.
Yeah, I think you made the right decision to not take the advice of the publishers and to follow other folks who said, no, you have to use that word.
Right.
Because any of those other substitutions, folk or folk tale, folklore, folk music, I mean, you have of the crowd, of the people, they all mean something different.
Yeah.
So that single word brings them all together, which actually requires you to spend like an entire chapter trying to define this term.
Yeah, there's another scholar, Sebastian Weg, who teaches in Toronto, who published a book also with a Minjian in the title. So Minjian, the grassroots intellectuals from China. So that was a few years ago. And I think one thing he put in his opening chapters was that Minjian is the most difficult word to translate from Chinese to English. And so he also spent, like a section talking about what Minjian means to him. But he's a political scientist, and he thinks more about the kind of people who belong to and associate themselves with grassroots activism. That's his understanding of Minjian. For me, I think it's like broader than that. It's more kind of affiliated with culture and artistic sort of definitions instead of activism. Also, I also talk about activism. Yeah.
So did I read this on the cover or in a review, the word marginalized communities? You don't really, do you use that term? Because clearly you're not talking about the elite or the official. Does marginalized and grassroots, do those work together, or is there a problem there as well?
So I think to say that Minjian is always about marginalized communities, it sounds good. That would be like a good spin for the book, but it does not really encompass everything I talk about in the book, because I do talk a lot about the popular, the kitschy, the kind of the copycat, which is actually prevalent in society. It's multiple, it's everywhere. People use it all the time, even though they're certainly perceived as non-elite or kind of, low-brown type of culture. So I do talk about that type of material culture a lot as well. So I think you can call that marginalized, even though it's non-elitist.
Yeah. All right, so you chose the hardest word to translate into English as the central concept and key word in the title. So why would you write this book? I mean, why not choose something easier to write about? Why write about this?
Did I make the right decision?
Yeah.
Reconsidering it again.
It's too late now to make a different decision.
Too late now, right?
Why write this? This is a really hard book to write. Why would you write it?
Right, so I guess I'll start that with kind of first triggering moment. That's back in 2011. 2011 summer, I was in Beijing doing some field research, like hanging out with artists and curators, basically. And so there was this curator named Lu Jie, and who is the founder of a large independent art organization called the Long March Space in Beijing. And he was, he got his Aimee in SOAS, London, in curatorial studies. He lives in this beautiful, renovated courtyard house with like personal assistants and personal chef, and was talking to a room full of scholars, artists, critics from all over the world about quoting Derrida and Foucault. And so like this ultra, sophisticated urban person. And then he was basically like the one who initiated the project called the Long March Project, for which he talked about, that's in 2002-3, he talked about 100 artists from China and abroad, including Judy Chicago, some of the big names, to some of the most impoverished and marginal regions of China, and to kind of make and display artworks along the way, experimental artworks along the way. And so when he talked about the experiences he had in these very poor, marginal regions where the kids never saw television, and so his eyes really lighted up, and he got super excited, and he was like, "Oh, we had to, travel for dozens of miles on foot and hitchhiking on unpaved road in order to get into a printer to print out some of the artworks." And so we, all these difficulties, like we were starved at some points, we were all like terribly tanned and became like skinny in the process. And so when he was talking about it, he was also talking about some of the villagers on the road who were very receptive to the artworks. And one artist, for example, made like a super realist baby for the villagers on the road to adopt as their own children. There are stories behind that, but that's like a really kind of a bizarre gesture. But all these kind of rural people, some of the people they approached were very receptive to the idea and actually cooperated. And so his eyes really lighted up. He was super excited by these type of experiences. So there's like these clear, sharp contrasts there, these two sides of his life. And you can call that hypocritical, but I don't think that's the answer. That's the real answer to these type of parallel lifestyles. And if you look at the history of the avant-garde throughout the 20th century, these two pursuits were always there. On one side, the avant-gardes were always these very sophisticated, cosmopolitan, well-educated people. Well, not necessarily well-educated, but let's say they're by definition exceptional, they're few. And if they don't belong to, then they're often associated with some of the culture elites and political elites in societies. And they want to kind of provoke the society by introducing something shocking and new, right? So that's one definition of the avant-garde. But on the other hand, many of them wanted their art to merge with life. They wanted their art to have a transformative effect on people's everyday lives. And they wanted to really sort of get a sense of authenticity from the connections with the down and dirty of the world. So I think these two types of urges were always there, and that's what made the pursuit of the avant-garde both interesting and problematic. And just, I found that fascinating. And also in China, I think these problems is even more complicated because pre-modern Chinese society was hyper hierarchical, say like the cultural and political and financial monetary elites were often one and the same. And then came the modern era, especially the Mao era, where the elites were really brutally wiped out and class differences were suppressed. The working class were kind of at least nominally worshipped as the models of society, right? So that's kind of like a 180 turn of things. Okay, so, and then the artists at this era, actually, they were also told frequently that they were creating art for the people, for the masses, right? That's the purpose of art. Art has to serve the people. And then it came the post-Mao era, where China very quickly, in a couple of decades, became, again, one of the most hierarchical societies in the world. And the income inequality in China today is worse than that in the US, which is bad enough already. But on the other hand, it's still nominally a socialist society. So the working class people, although they are in fact marginalized and discriminated against, they're still praised as model of the society in the sort of official discourse. So this tension between the elite and the Minjian, the grassroots, the marginal, however you translate it, it's even more interesting and intriguing in Chinese society and art productions. So that's why I really want to dig into this tension, this paradox, and see, if I can find something new from these very interesting dynamic forces.
I'm glad you wrote it. A, because I could never have written it and wouldn't have tried. But two, because as complicated as all of those relationships are and all of those nuances and all of those very specific context and historical conditions are, like, you can just read this thing. It's like, I wasn't finding myself, okay, what does this word mean? And what does that mean? And although I was wrestling with the concepts and I didn't know all of the names, of course, but I enjoyed reading this.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's take on the big challenges. It's possible. Mm-hmm. This is really, thank you for writing it. Seriously, because maybe selfishly it relates to some work that I'm quite interested in, is socially engaged artwork. I'm really interested in contemporary art practice as it relates to art education. We don't do that kind of work or study the contemporary kinds of work that you study for this book, or contemporary artwork that is socially engaged or social practice work in K-12 schools. It doesn't happen as often as I think it should. I think it's more possible because of what you've shared. I mean, many of the examples you provide people, not that this was your intention, but provide people with different ways to access the work through the political, the cultural, the social, historical, like all of those contexts. You make it seem like, okay, it's still complicated, but I can get my head around it, at least as I'm reading it. So it's really powerful to experience that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had I heard similar comments from a number of people that they were not in the field, not in my field, but they found the book accessible. And to me, that's the highest compliment. It's like, I don't want to write something that, you need a very specialized set of expertise and knowledge to understand. I do want the book to have some life in Minjian as well, so to speak.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, just between the two of us, I didn't feel that way in the first couple pages. I was like, what in the world? Like, it was really, because you just jump right into the thick of it, but it opens up. Like, it wasn't like oh God, I'm never going to be able to talk to her about this. It was a little thick in I'd say the first couple paragraphs. I'm like, okay, where am I? Oh, that's it. That makes sense. It was very easy. Yeah.
Thank you. I struggled with introduction the most. Yeah.
I hear that from a lot of people too. Introduction is the hardest thing. Some people think you write it in the beginning. No, you often write it at the end, once you figure out what it is that you have. And it's even more challenging because the thing has developed and changed over time. And so now you're introducing something that you're just coming to afresh for in recent times. So, all right, enough about the introduction. Enough about my reading of it. I have a couple more questions, but before we move on, I just have to say, for those of you who haven't experienced these book talks before, I have some questions for Chang, and then we'll open it up to the crowd, as we should, right? It should be of the crowd, so we'll open it up to everyone for some questions, and then we'll spend time enjoying beverages and light treats over there. So back to the questions. I prepared some questions, but also I want to ask some questions that I hadn't prepared. So, okay. So, social practice, socially engaged art. I'm really taken by this little handbook by Pablo Helguera. It's called, Socially Engaged Handbook for Socially Engaged Art. It's like a spoof, right? It's a toolkit for doing social practice artwork, which you can't really have, right? There's no set tools. But a couple of things he says in different parts of one of his chapters, and I kind of merge them together to explain social practice and socially engaged art. He says, it's to provoke reflection in order to discover something in the process. And I think that entry point works for lots of things we do, but I think it really works for the examples that you have here in the book, that provoking reflection, provoking reinterpretation, provoking engagement is what the artists that you select, because you have several artists that you highlight and focus on throughout the book. How did you choose the artists to focus on that would provoke reflection, or the art groups to provoke reflection?
Mm-hmm. So it's like to provoke reflection beyond the usual circle of art. I think that's kind of my criteria. So these artworks I studied, they certainly do not just belong to or stop at museums and galleries and auction houses and biennials, but they actually go out there and travel the world and sometimes go into unexpected places. And I want to actually see, the afterlife of art, so to speak, once you're out there in the world. So I think that's one of my primary criteria that I like. So artists who, for example, who have the performance piece of putting paintings on a dumpster to have people come by and pick them up, and then trying to take photos of these people who picked up these paintings, and then the people kind of rioted against that, and then they were sent to the police and had to apologize for taking pictures of people without asking for the permission. That's one of the earlier works I talked about that happened in the 1980s. So it's like all these unexpected afterlives of art, like when artists scheduled like public burning of their artworks outside of the museum as the finale of exhibition, and then what happened after the burning, like how these events turned into news and was subject to interpretations, how that launched, different ways of understanding what constituted art is not just objects, but also the text and images that were generated by these actions or objects. So there are all these afterlives of art that I really tried to focus on. And I selected artworks that had this type of afterlife being recorded in some way or the other. And so that's like one way for me to select these artworks. And also there's like a conceptual scheme. I don't know if anyone wants to hear about that. This is like why I kind of introduce them as like, first you have this proto-Minjian art in 1980s, where artists were just encountering the new post-Mao Minjian that was not as monolithic as the Minjian in the Mao era, because people call of course, the public in the Mao era were not really monolithic. There was still plenty of diversities, but they were not allowed to speak out, right? Different voices were not allowed to speak out. But in 1980s and beyond, then you see these more volatile kind of sort of heterogeneous Minjian coming out. So there was this proto-Minjian avant-garde in 1980s when the artists started to realize that Minjian is more divergent, more vibrant than they previously recognized. And then I had 3 groups of artists and art collectives who tried to define Minjian first of all conceptually, like how did the individual artist convey the voices of Minjian? How do you really kind of redefine that process? And then you have this group of artists, the Long March Project actually tried to define Minjian in a territorial way, like Minjian is what happened in the geographical margins and demographic margins of China. And then you have another group of artists and another chapter in which they try to define Minjian in the material sense. Like Minjian are the kind of objects created by artists and non-artists that were intentionally almost exchangeable with popular culture or copycat culture. So the differences between artworks and commercial products and folk or craft objects became intentionally blurred. Okay, so in that group of artists, and finally I have the chapter of Ai Weiwei, who is, first of all, artist that everyone knows, and then whom I think is someone who pushed the Minjian avant-garde idea to the most successful, globally relevant sort of stage, even though his practices also had, problems and critique. So that's the basic way I selected and framed this project.
Your focus on Ai Weiwei, I want to come back to that because I read that one a little more deeply than the other chapters. But the middle section where you talk about art that kind of blurs the lines, just from my perspective and my education, my looking at it, I'm thinking about pop culture. I'm thinking about contemporary art practice in the U.S. I'm thinking about Andy Warhol. I'm thinking about Arthur Danto's work and the ways that blurring, the objectness, right? When does an object, when is art, right?
Yeah.
When is art? And I think you kind of wrestle with that in some ways.
Yeah, right. That happened mostly in the fourth chapter. Yeah. In which
I'm saying because I memorized every chapter, but you're right. Yeah.
So, right. So that's like what makes mundane object art, right? So usually you have these defining moment is that when art enters a museum, artwork enters a museum, it became institutionalized, and then it became even more of art when it's written, like in art history books. There's a monograph about it. Certainly, that's art. So, but this is so arbitrary, also in a way, right? It's like because, and especially, I see a lot of ironies here because, especially for avant-garde artists, their main agenda, one of the main agendas is institutional critique, is to anti-establishment. But still, it's like all their provocative gestures eventually became incorporated in institutions, and that still marked the success. So I think this is the irony that we cannot entirely avoid. But I still want to get into, like there are, for example, I wrote about like the so-called copycat art, right? So Yue Minjun, who is one of the most successful contemporary artists today, and whose work sold for millions in Sotheby's and Christie's, and then you have like artists in these small workshops on the street side who painted Yue Minjun. Like I bought one of those back in like 2015 or something for like 250 kwai, which is like $30. And so that artist painted a Yue Minjun and signed the name of Yue Minjun and gave it to me. And it looks very real, and it's not even a copy per se, because he was combining like different components of Yue Minjun's paintings and put them in a new narrative, right? So it's like a collage or assembly of Yue Minjun's existing paintings, and he captured his style very well, which is very kind of extremely recognizable. And on the other hand, Yue Minjun himself, of course, he had this very successful kind of gimmicky human figure that he just kept on churning out very super recognizable and in some way similar paintings by dozens or hundreds of them. And many of them were executed by his assistants, right? And then signed by him. So in a way, what's the difference like between these kind of serialized, not even painted by himself, but authorized paintings of Yue Minjun and these copycat painting done by this anonymous artist and sold for a fraction of his price? And I think there's like a lot of questions that arose, when I was researching on contemporary Chinese art. And I think that applies to contemporary art in general as well. Like there are so many successful contemporary artists who just keep on producing the same style of artworks, some of them not done by themselves, but their art, while the imitations by the less known artists were not. So I tried to wrestle with that quite a bit,
And I think part of what you also do is you I shouldn't say elevate, but you draw attention to those individuals, not necessarily individually, but collectively, as being overlooked or under addressed. Is that a key contribution your book makes to the field? Like, why do we care about your book? What does your book contribute to art history? What does it contribute to the study of contemporary art globally, contemporary art in China? What does your work contribute?
It's, that's what the publisher and the peer reviewers keep on asking as well.
We want to know. Come on.
Yeah, that's very important because, I think any scholarship should answer the question, like, why should anyone care? Yeah, there's so many more interesting things out there. But so I would say, like, it does contribute to, first of all, the field of contemporary Chinese art. And I think it fills a gap there. So this art has been, spectacularly successful for about a decade, and now I think it has peaked and in decline. But so there were lots of writing about this art, and so I think it's mostly focused on, first of all, its success in the global art market, how it became so successful. That's a lot of people wrote about that, and then there were a lot of writing about the art's relationship with politics, right? Because of this fascination with China as authoritarian society, and how these artists were either dissidents or collaborators with the government. So that's a major part of the scholarship. And then there was like books and articles focusing on certain types of art, like feminist art, queer art, art about urbanization, different themes. Okay, or different types of schools or art communities. So these are the type of scholarships out there. But very few scholars, I believe, have paid attention to contemporary Chinese art's relationship with its own public, with domestic public. And I think the assumption is that, people in China, very few of them give a damn about contemporary art, and the art has lost touch with the general public, which is not entirely false. I think the assumption is not entirely false because, you see that here as well. Not that many people care about contemporary art, especially the very provocative, experimental kind. But I believe that the artists still cared deeply about the domestic public, the non-elitist public, for all the reasons I kind of talked about before. And their attempt to reach out, to appropriate, to engage to this public was crucial to the art practices. So their impact on the public is doubtful. It's not always strong. But the public's impact on their art, the public, either real or imagined public, their impact on their art is significant and should be addressed. So I think that's a gap I filled. And also, I think my book tries to change the theoretical framework of socially engaged art, or relational, socially engaged, participatory, however you call it. And that type of art has been on the rise since 1990s, 1980s. And so there are a lot of prominent scholars writing about it, Claire Bishop, Grant Kester, Nato Thompson, Boreal, whatever. But so I think they almost never write about China in their globally scoped works. And it's kind of interesting because when I was reading Claire Bishop's book, Artificial Health, one of the books about participatory art, she actually said she looked into Long March Project, but she decided not to write about it because it does not fit into her framework. So I think that's a sign that the framework needs to be changed, right? So it's the framework is not universal or inclusive enough. So, and I think a lot of these writings about socially engaged art is based on a sort of model that is seemingly universal, but in fact Eurocentric. So it's so they're based on this structure that you have the museum that is professional, resourceful, and able to turn any kind of provocation into display or spectacle. And then you have a government that is democratic and at least nominally supports the freedom and autonomy of art. And then you have a public or a kind of viewing crowd. Some of them are kind of naive and ready to be shocked. And some of them are sophisticated and willing to kind of savor any acts of provocation. So I think that's the sort of general framework in which socially engaged art was understood. But that's not the case in China at all. Okay, so the museum structure was not there. The government is different. The viewing public is much more complicated than that. It's not an either-or situation. And I think actually this type, it's not just China. For most of the world outside of Europe and China and America, this is not the kind of artwork we're dealing with kind of museums and audience and government. So I think I want to, like address, kind of talk about the sort of socially engaged participatory art in which like the power relations are more complicated and in which the making and circulation and consumption of objects played a more important role. It's not just about human relations. So these are kind of some of the changes I want to make in the existing framework of participatory or socially engaged art.
Yeah, I think pushing against, like you offered Claire Bishop's framework as a clear example, but I think pushing against even more collectively fairly rigid definition of socially engaged art certainly is an important contribution and opens up more possibilities. Again, I think about Helguera's work, and he talks about kind of a continuum between the symbolic approaches, right, to what he calls more actual, more real, and what you've laid out, I think, is more complicated than that in a wonderful way, right? Because if we don't take into consideration the historic and the political context, or the cultural sensitivity, right? It's easier to say, oh no, this is what it is, and we don't have to deal with that other stuff. But when our framework or our perspective opens, maybe you can start to dislodge that rigid framework. So that's I'd say that's a big contribution. What was the most surprising thing? Oh, I have leaves on the floor. Look at this. What's the most surprising? Yeah, that's surprising. Yeah, surprising thing that you discovered in the process of writing the book, researching and writing the book.
Okay, so.
Because you probably anticipated some things,
right.
But what was surprising?
So I think they're like, I'll talk about one good surprise and one bad surprise.
Oh, I like the bad ones. Yeah.
So okay, I'll say the good ones first. I'll save the bad/good one for later. So the good surprise is that I really discovered that Minjian, or the non-elite viewers or collaborators, participants of artworks, they had like more agency than I or the artist expected. So they were not the passive recipients of whatever the artist tried to do. And so, for example, so there's this case I wrote about in the 4th chapter. And so this artist named Li Mu, a young artist in his 30s, he had a residency in the Van Abbey Museum in the Netherlands. And so he proposed this project with the curator there, saying that I'm gonna select 10 works from your collection, like modern minimalist art primarily, and exhibit them in my hometown, Qiuzhuang, which is a small, poor, marginal village in the northern of Jiangsu of China. So he proposed that, and the curator was like, I'll think about it. I'm not sure, like our collection going there. And then he talked to a Dutch artist, and who said, well, they're like villagers. They don't care about whether artwork is original or not. Only people in the art world do. So how about you just get the license to reproduce 10 works in that location, right? And so, of course, the curator said, yeah, sure, go ahead, right? So that's like much less, problems, insurance and all that. So he did that. And then when he did bring these projects there and to recreate to the precise measurement of 10 works he selected from the collection, the villagers were like, well, this is fun, but it's not original work of the Western artist. It's not their own work. It's basically worthless. So, and so they did take these works and use them. Like, for example, there are Carl Andres, this Dan Flavin's work that they recreated there, and the people, they just used them as like street lights because they did not have street lights. And then there were Carl Andres, I think 24 metal plates that they were installed on someone's courtyard, and that person just used the metal plates as a display platform for his bird cages. And and then there were works by Silhouette that they just used as shelves like in their households. So like at first of all, they completely understood like the idea of originality and copy. They're not stupid. And then they reused, these kind of modern artworks for their own, like everyday household activities. And I think this is one of the many cases in which the so-called Minjian participants really showed as much agency and creativity and, like discerning ability than as every one of us. So it's like, I think that part surprised me. That's a good surprise. And the bad surprise happened towards the end of my book publication process. And some of you have heard of that already, I know. So is that my last chapter is about Ai Weiwei. And I've worked with him before, and actually just a few months before this book, I published a piece on him that he had no problem giving me copyrights of his images. But when I asked for copyrights for the right to publish his artworks in this book, and first he said, oh yes, go ahead, like assistant, please just send her all the images tomorrow. And then the next day, I got a long email from him saying like, no, I'm not gonna give you image rights because your writing is critical. And so he did not say critical, he said it's wrong, it's false. Okay. And then he actually, and then I kind of tried to, argue back and say, no, I totally respect you, everything in the book is true and I'm not trying to be critical of you at all. And then he actually like sent back a PDF document with passages like highlighted in yellow. That's the part that he wanted me to change before he could give me image rights. And I just said no, then this book was published without a single image.
There's no Ai Weiwei images in the whole book. Yeah.
And of course the publisher hated it, but so that really surprised me because Ai Weiwei, it's always known as a rebel and someone who's critical of, censorship. And so then when he did not like what I wrote, he decided to censor the book. And he said, oh, I have no right to censor your writing. I just don't want to lend my image to this flawed writing about my art. So that's like a bad surprise that really upset me for about a week.
You sure he didn't want you to use the edited PDFs as the images? That's the thing. Like I actually told the publisher, maybe you can use that as a publicity. Like that could be the cover of the book. Yeah.
That's to kind of publish the highlighted passages on the blog or on the social media or something, saying, these are what Ai Weiwei does not want you to know. But then they said no, they're too afraid of legal trouble, so they don't want to do any of these. Yeah. I'm
glad you shared that that surprise. I was going to ask you about thinking, okay, wonder what this is about. Contemporary Chinese Ai Weiwei's got to be in here. And first thing I do is I open the book and there are images in the middle of the book. Okay, great. Wait, there's no Ai Weiwei. And then in the beginning, so the introduction, you actually explain in a really gentle, polite way how he didn't like what I wrote, so I'm not putting it in. I mean, the way you handled it was really well done. But you said something about they are conspicuously absent from the book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's conspicuously absent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, what I wrote, everything there was footnoted, had reliable sources. He cannot really point out a single thing that was actually false. It's really just like, anyway, I'm not sure if I want to go into that. No,
let's not go there.
You can read it if you want to see, like, you can guess which part that he really does not like in that chapter. You handle it really well, I have to say. And I will say that I've read a few articles previously about his work. What you did, you put together
anyone who's studying his work needs to read your chapter. Really, it just brings it together and lays out the complications, but also the ways in which you describe the work, and then point to the elements of the work that then have references. I'm thinking about the work. Well, there's two: the fairy tales, where he flies 1,001 people from China to Germany to participate in the right in the exhibition. And then the work, I don't remember what it's called, but it's with all of the backpacks of they're not backpacks of the children, but to reference the earthquake and the thousands of people who died and all of these children's backpacks on the side of a museum. That one came to mind immediately. I thought, it has to be in here, and it wasn't in here. But the way you describe it, I didn't really need the images to understand what those works were doing. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And I also think in a way it's, the book can actually be a way with other ways art, because you can always Google it, right? Some of
that's
our
right.
work
Yeah,
here,
that's right.
You can't find them online, but you can. So.
That's a good point. All right, I have 5 more questions. These are going to be really short questions, and you can give really short answers, and then we can open up to our panel of experts here, right? We can open up to the people.
Fun questions.
These are great they're fun questions.
Yeah, they're great questions.
All right, ready for this first one? What is your favorite word? You're an art historian. You use words all the time. What is your favorite word?
My favorite word is worldly.
Worldly.
Yeah, I like the sound of it. It's melodious, worldly, and I like every connotation of it.
Worldly.
So I just deeply appreciate worldly people, and I would always hope that I possess, worldly smarts instead of saintly wisdom. That I would never.
There's a T-shirt in there somewhere. Worldly people. I'd like it. All right. What's your least favorite word?
Okay. That would be instigate.
Instigate.
Maybe it's my own understanding of it that is off, but I feel that this word is both kind of aggressive, harsh, and vague. So when I read in scholarly writings, which actually happens a lot, like I say, I want to instigate this and that, I'm never entirely sure what the person is trying to do. So I think that there is always a more precise verb you can use instead of instigate. So I just don't like that word.
Okay. I will steer clear of it. Instigate. What's your favorite city?
My favorite city, well, there are lots of cities I really like.
This is a hard question. That's one of the reasons.
Actually, somehow, the ones that came to my mind first are cities in Southeast Asia. I spent some time there. I did like Singapore for some reason, even though it's I know it's so sterile, so sanitized, but it's charming in some ways. And also really like Siem Reap, which is very different from Singapore. It's where the Angkor Wat is located. I spent a week there, and that was the best vacation I had. I also liked another Southeast Asian city, Bali, in Indonesia. But that's really easy to like. Everyone likes Bali. So I really liked Southeast Asian cities.
Okay. Yeah. Aside from this one, what is your favorite book?
Okay. This is not my favorite.
Okay, good. I think I've heard that answer somewhere before. Go ahead.
So I would say I really love Doris Lessing's The Golden Notebook.
The Golden Notebook. Why?
Because I think it captured the life, both the intellectual and emotional and biological, personal lives of women in the most wonderful way. It's just so real, but also so layered, and it's so against every stereotype people had about, female intellectuals' lives, but also like so just raw and real, and rendered in a very sophisticated way. So.
Okay, Golden Notebook. All right. Last question. If you were not an academic, if you were not an art historian or a scholar of Asian studies, what profession would you have?
I would become either a fiction writer or film director. It's like I actually came from a literature background. I always feel like a fake art historian. Like I came from Complet. And I would say literature was my first love, and film the second, and art probably the third. And and I really love, and I wish I could just use words and images to tell stories. So to be either a fiction writer, film director would be that, and to tell stories of my own and others in a way that is intimate but not confessional. So it's like that's what I really love to do.
I can see it. I can see it. All right, thank you. We're going to turn it to the group here. Questions for Chang Tan? All right, so 1 and then 2, and then we'll keep moving. Go ahead.
So Chang, one of the chapters I really enjoyed was the one on calligraphy. And I guess because, working in earlier periods and kind of my mind, being focused on art of earlier periods, it's the one that strikes the strongest continuity with the kind of historical Chinese, kind of art and cultural production. So I guess I'd just say, would you speak a little bit about that and how calligraphy might fits into this, something we consider very high, literati, type of art in with Minjian here.
Right. So that's like my second chapter where I talk about Qiu Zhijie, how he turned calligraphy into the writing of Minjian. So calligraphy actually has this very interesting double nature to begin with. On one hand, it's like a very, the most privileged elitist art in traditional China, and it's literati art, right? It's like, a painting without calligraphy, it's basically not considered proper art in traditional China, right? So, but on the other hand, especially in modern times, it's something that everyone can do. It's just writing, right? It's just writing, and you write either pretty handwriting or not so pretty. So I think Qiu Zhijie, this experimental artist, really tried to do that. So his earlier works were repetitively, compulsively kind of copying the most sort of privileged work of calligraphy in the history of Chinese art, the Orchard Pavilion Preface. He wrote it 1,000 times, supposedly on a single piece of paper, until it turned pitch black, just obviously. After first a few times, it's unreadable, right? He kept on writing until the whole thing was just a thick, ink-soaked paper that almost fell apart. And then later on, he did similar things, like to copy the writings from Minjian. So to copy from the writings on newspapers, craftsman's writing that was carved on the stone, and the kind of popular song lyrics that were printed, and the kind of sayings from different people, recorded in the media. So he then did a different work a decade later. There are a number of works in between as well, in which he really tried to think through how you use the voice or the writer, the hand of the single person, to convey a voice from the multitude. So the last work of his that I was talking about is when he actually managed to do that, he hand copied hundreds of phrases that he selected from the history of China, from the news media, from different outlets, including gibberish from the computers, personal notes, whatnot. He copied all of them, and then he made robins of all of them. He carved them onto slabs of cement and made robins of them, and he layered one cement on top of each other until it became a cube in which all the words were kind of buried inside. So he made like 8 of these cubes in which hundreds of phrases were buried from Minjian. So, and again, it has, I think, the same logic here that you repeat, some phrases, you write it, and then, but the end result was invisible. And by doing that, he imagined himself as basically a conduit. Like he was just copying, he was not creating new artworks, right? In a way, he was not like writing his own words or even using his own hand because he copied other people's handwritings as well. And then that's his way of turning the individual into basically a conduit of the multitude. And at the same time, kind of really recording the voices from the multitude, while at the same time conveying the idea that history of these multitude of voices is ultimately unreadable because they were all buried in these kind of cubes. So that's, I think that chapter actually I found that the most difficult to explain, like in a sort of shorter form, because it's conceptually most complex among all these works. Is not so obviously Minjian related, but I'm glad you liked it and found it relevant to the subject.
Very much.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Cass?
Yeah, Chang, thank you,
Thank you.
for all of this. And you really got me thinking about, museum practice. And, as you pointed out, I think, and I certainly can't disagree, that museums, at least in many locations, they end up kind of co-opting any sort of resistance that might be brought to bear. And I'm wondering about your thinking and the book in relation to curatorial practice. And if there's, I was trying to think of exactly how to phrase the question. And I think ultimately my question is, hey, did you ever think about being a curator? But then my other question, and I know you have curated, exhibitions, and I was wondering if you had that moment, as I know a lot of, scholars do. Do I want to go into curatorial work? Do I want to go into academic work? But so you have the option of 2 different ways to go. Or if there's a lesson to be pulled from your book for contemporary art curators today, what might that lesson be?
That's a great question.
I never really thought about becoming a curator. It never occurred to me because, again, I came from a different trajectory. I was a literature person, and I became art historian almost by accident. So, but I did enjoy curating that one exhibition at the Palmer and later immensely. I think it's about facing a different audience that I liked.
That was Global Asia's.
Yeah, that's Global Asia's. Thank you for remembering.
Yes.
And so, but I would not want to be a curator full time. I'd like to only do it on the side. But for the curators, I think, so one thing I would think of is that to display socially engaged art was always very, very difficult. I don't know if you had any experiences like to introduce students to or introduce museum visitors to socially engaged, relational, participatory art, unless it's actually happening
Right.
in
That's
a
right.
museum. That's another thing, right? So you actually, if you present them as like artworks on the wall or in the vitrine, that's very difficult.
Right.
Because they're meant to be experienced in a way. So there were always these 2 layers of experiences for these type of artworks, like those who actually participated in it, contributed to it. And that can happen in museums too, right? And in biennials, that does happen to get the viewers involved. But then for the secondary kind of display or experiences where they are turned into images, photographs, words, sometimes films, the experiences are radically different and oftentimes lackluster. So, and I guess I don't have a solution for that, but I would say that, so it's also had to do with the fact that nowadays a lot of people go to museums in order to experience something instead of just to see something. And so that's, on the other hand, the attraction of certain type of participatory art, that you can actually go there and like play a game together instead of just looking at something on the wall. And so the immersive art experiences that are more popular in museums nowadays are doing that as well. So I'm just hoping that maybe like curators in the future, and I know that a lot of them are already doing that too, when they try to present socially engaged art or participatory art, they can combine these two aspects of it, like secondary and the first layer of experiences and the second layer of experiences. And I think they're different but equally important. And if there's like exhibition in which you can do the participatory part first and then maybe move on to the next gallery and see the images and texts that were generated probably from previous participants. And I think that would be interesting to kind of to do both. And again, it's not like a brand new strategy. Curators are already doing that in certain settings. So but that's what my thinking is.
Thank you.
Great.
And I have to say, something you said earlier that I thought was so beautiful and made me think that it was kind of fundamental in many ways, maybe, to the curatorial enterprise, was that creating an intimacy that is not necessarily confessional. That I thought that was a really interesting turn of phrase, and it made me think, oh yeah, I think that's what curators sometimes struggle with also.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yes, question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this book. I actually have not read books, so I can't draw from the book like they did, but I look forward to reading the whole thing. My question is also kind of hinging on your favorite word, worldly. Yeah, I feel like this has always been in the background of your book, that, even with the Long March project, they invited so many foreign artists to basically inhabit the Chinese landscape, the Chinese margin, and also a lot of the art archives and collectors. It's not just the Chinese enterprise, so to be called. I just want to ask you to see if you have more thoughts on bringing this kind of the Chinese-foreign relations. How does that come to define, or came to define, the concept of Minjian to your book? And also thinking about, the kind of art that was being discussed in your book, from my little short glance on the landscape of artwork. I also feel like it was a very different Chinese art scene back then. I was just also wondering if you also foresee the Minjian to be slightly different, or do you feel like it is slightly different already, given the changing of the global dynamics?
So which, different from when, current?
Yeah, from the, I would say from basically where you trace these artworks to, with the emergence of the Chinese avant-garde with the opening of China, and then with also the starting of all these kind of collectors of Chinese avant-garde art. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess first, if I understand you correctly, so all these, I think a lot of the artists I write about in this book are very worldly as well, because they're, every time they turn to Minjian, they're also simultaneously gesturing to the wider world, to the global art world, so to speak, because the concept of authenticity and marginality sells, right? In the contemporary artwork, it's important. It's like if you can garner a sense of authenticity and you can convince people that you speak for the marginalized population, that's a huge deal in contemporary artwork. So again, that's a kind of paradox of the avant-garde business that I was talking about. And so a lot of the artists were doing that. It's like the Long March project, it was internationally very successful. It went on, dozens of biennials, and it helped funding one of the most successful art organizations in China. It attracted big names across the world. So I think that's one thing about these artists. I don't know if that's so they're aware of many layers of context: the domestic, the Minjian context, the commercial context, the political context, and the global art world game. So I think like everything they do, especially the successful ones, they're speaking to and sometimes drawing resources, support from all these different sources. And so that's, and Ai Weiwei is the best example of that. It's like he's supposed to be speaking for the most victimized, marginalized population, not only in China but across the world, because he had this project about global refugees. But he's also at the same time connected to elites all across the world, right? And he had almost unlimited resources to create whatever he wanted in a very short time. So that's like, so that's one thing. And in the second question you had, I think is like, how did the Minjian change? And I would say that the Minjian is as vibrant as before, probably even more so, but you hear about them less and less in the past 10 years because of the political situation in China that, like for example, the kind of grassroots activism that was very vibrant in China in the late 1990s and early 2000s, they basically died down in the last 10 years because of the current President Xi Jinping, who was really more draconian than previous leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. So that in that way, I think when you actually go down to China and talk to the artists or like people in the nail salon or shop owners, whatnot, you found out that oftentimes the thoughts are as vibrant and globally aware and thoughtful as before, but you don't hear them, not in news media, not in social media, not online, because the internet in China is very much censored, and people censor themselves a lot as well, just unless they're in a private space, they don't speak up.
So I'm not an artist at all. I am speaking more from like a political economy kind of perspective and international development. I kept thinking, like, the Minjian, if you take them out of its frame in which it was created, whatever it be, is it really Minjian? The moment you get it to a museum or something or somebody, how do you as an artist think of that? And the other thing is like contemporary artists who are doing this, trying to give voice to the people who are not. What's the political economy of that? Like, who's making the profits from that? Where is that profit being shared? Because if they're really bringing voice, the invisible or the unheard, out in the open, I think it's kind of very superficial to go through the motions of whatever and then present it to the global art world. And I'm interested in knowing what's the political economy of that? Where are the profits of that going? In those kinds, like, is that something the art world is thinking of? Like, if I'm really speaking for the downtrodden, do I have a responsibility in making money? Where's that money going back to? Because within the social science world, there's a lot of issues around that, ethics of that. How do you speak for the poor? Can you speak for the poor?
Right.
So, your comments on that.
Yeah, that's it's a conundrum that, again, I don't think you can entirely solve that, and I think if you say any artwork, the moment it enters museum, is no longer Minjian, it's not entirely true, maybe. So, like, you still have, exhibitions of folk art, exhibition of so-called outsider art, and there are like vernacular art that nowadays museums start collecting more than before. And, actually the project I work on now is really about vernacular art, the kind of personal photographs of people. But now they're also starting to enter the museums, like the National Gallery of Art. They just started this year to collect early vernacular photographs of African Americans. They just had the first collection of that.
Isn't that
So
something?
Yeah, right. So the curators of photography were, very proud of it. But it's also like, oh, that's the first collection in 2024, right? So, but so they're still personal photos, right? So they were not meant to be exhibited in museums. They were but that now they're in a collection and they will be seen in the museum. But I think they probably still retain some of the vernacular character. People are aware that these are just photos, people give to the friends and family members. And so that's one part of it. As for the political economy of Minjian art okay, I can't speak for the entire picture of it, but I can just talk about how it became associated with power in recent years in China. So, and it has happened before as well. If you think about in the past, fascism also claimed that it spoke for the people, but now it's in China, basically Minjian is experiencing a revival now. So, and that translates directly to folk art. Okay, folk art, it was forgotten for a long time. The government did not pay a lot of attention to that, but in the last 5 years, just in an attempt to revive national cultures in a way that is ostensibly non-elitist. This is a kind of nominally socialist government's attempt to say that we are still a government of the people, or we are still representing the proletarian or whatever, which no one truly believes. But they are throwing a lot of money into folk art. So they're training artists in academies, elite academies, to relearn folk art from the surviving masters. And if you turn on the TV, the Travel Channel, whatever, they don't talk about foreign countries anymore. It's all the Culture Channel, the Travel Channel of the CCTV. They are all about embroidery, about porcelain, and they have the old masters with their young students trying to recreate these national treasures, craftsmanship. And so again, these previously marginalized, crafts, arts, people, now they've been appropriated as a symbol of nationalism and national revival. And it's also also almost become a discourse of xenophobic kind of narrative. We don't need any of these European bourgeoisie, whatever art, we have our own. So that's, I think, political economy of Minjian or folk art that speaks very loud in this current situation. And you can always, the sort of populist discourse often easily translate to real politics. Like you say, if someone can totally kind of skip the middle layer and say, I speak for the people, and if they can convince the broad population that they are actually the singular person who can speak for the people, this person would acquire tremendous power, right? And we've seen that happening all over the world. So populism in art and in politics are quite dangerous sometimes.
Yeah. With that, I'm going to call time. I want to thank the staff of the Office of Research, Creative Activity, and Graduate Studies and of the Woskob Gallery. Thanks for putting on this show. This is a thing now. So we really appreciate you doing that.
The IT folks.
And the IT folks, thank you for the technological magic that you do. Thank you for that and recording the talk. And Chang Tan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That's such a pleasure, and to have this conversation with you. And you're really the best conversationalist.
Oh.
It's you make people relax. I think
thank you.
At the beginning I was a bit nervous, but then you put me at ease.
Oh,
So,
I'm glad.
yeah.
I'm glad. Well, thank you. Chang Tan.